So there are 8 plants that I absolutely cannot put in my GeoBin composting rigs back there. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a spectacular day. It is Tuesday, June 13th here in South Georgia, and on today's video we need to clean out one of our beds back here. We need to move our little in-bed worm farm, see if the worms are still alive there, and we're going to talk about 8 plants that you probably don't want to put in your compost pile. So the first thing we need to do is clean out this bed here, pull out these squash plants. These plants have officially had it. They've probably had it for about a week and a half now. I'm just getting around to getting it cleaned out and showing you guys the process. The production has slowed considerably on these plants. I think we've got maybe one good squash there we need to pick, but they've slowed down a lot. So a few weeks ago we talked about the importance of not letting your squash plants hang around too long after they start getting ridden with disease, especially if you live in a southern climate. And when we talked about that, we went ahead and planted some more squash. And those seeds all germinated well. These plants are growing fast, looking good. Got a little bit of insect pressure on these that we probably need to take care of, but happy with how they're looking so far. We got half a row of gold prize straight neck squash, which is what was over there in that raised bed, and then the other half of the row has the Pantheon zucchini. So we didn't plan our succession planting perfectly because these squash are done and those others aren't producing yet, but at the rate those others are growing, I imagine we'll be getting some squash here from those in the next couple weeks. So yeah, we're gonna go without squash for a little bit, but that'll be all right. Sometimes it's nice to have a little break. So now let's get this cleaned out. It looks like a jungle, but there's really only 3 squash plants in here. These did really well for us. Got some really good production off these. Once we get these out of here, we'll be able to see our worm bed a little better. Some nice strong root systems on those. So we're gonna pull these up, but we're not gonna put them in our compost bins. We're gonna just throw them out in the yard, and I'll tell you why. So it's no big secret that there are some vegetables we grow in the backyard garden that give us more headaches as far as disease and insects go. Things like squash and tomatoes can really get tore up by the diseases and the insects. If we contrast those with something like onions or lettuce, we don't ever have to spray those. We don't have to do anything. We don't really ever have any issues with those. So those crops for which we do have a lot of disease and insect issues are the ones we probably do not want to put in our compost bin. Now let me preface this by saying, if you are a professional backyard composter and you can get your compost pile steaming hot, this may not apply to you. But if you're an average Joe like myself and you're just kind of throwing garden debris in a GeoBin or a pile, you can get it kind of hot but not necessarily steaming hot. This will apply to you. So there are 8 plants that I absolutely cannot put in my GeoBin composting rigs back there. And these 8 plants are within 2 plant families that tend to give us a lot more disease and insect issues. So those 8 plants I mentioned are either in the cucurbit family or the nightshade family. I don't want to compost any plant that's a cucurbit or a nightshade. So those cucurbits would include squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, and watermelon. Those are the main 4 I grow and the 4 that I don't want in my compost bins. And then for the nightshades we have tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplant. Now the tomatoes and the potatoes tend to have a lot more issues around here than do the peppers and the eggplant. I won't put any of the 4 in my compost bins, but depending on your pest pressure, you might could get away with the peppers and the eggplant. So for those 8 veggies this time of year, they get thrown out here in the grass and they'll get chopped up by the lawnmower in the next few days. I will make sure to blow them out that way, not back towards my garden plots here. In the winter months, when I'm not cutting the grass as often, I'll put them in that burn pile back there. But since we're cutting grass every 5 or 6 days this time of year, these will get chopped up pretty soon. So not only do you not want to put them in your compost pile, you want to get them out of the garden. Now I know in the middle of summer, some of you out there, your gardens get grown up with weeds and it's hard to tell the difference between a vegetable plant and a weed, and you kind of just let it go until the next year. But you'll be doing yourself a huge favor getting those diseased and insect-ridden plants out of there. Now if you live up north, the whole garden cleanup thing might not be quite as crucial because in the winter it gets cold enough to kill those fungal spores and insect eggs. But down here, it doesn't get cold enough for that to happen. They overwinter in our soil and then cause more problems the following year. Now, in addition to having some good garden sanitation or garden cleanup habits, I'm a big believer in rotation. You know this if you've been watching the channel for a while. So I won't plant cucurbits or nightshades in the same spot in consecutive years. That really helps reduce our pest pressure year after year. Now let's assume you just have a small backyard garden plot, maybe the size of one of our plots out here, say 30 by 35 or so. And in that space, it can be really hard to rotate things because there's only so many ways you can shift things around in, say, a 30 by 35 plot. So what can you do in that case? Now I know there's a lot of stuff you'll hear and read out there about the damaging effects of tilling or cultivating your soil, and yes, you can certainly do some damage if you over cultivate your soil. But there is one benefit to cultivating your soil, and that is that it will disrupt those insect eggs and fungal spores that are trying to overwinter in your soil. I'm not saying get out there and till the fire out of it, but an occasional cultivation throughout the winter might not hurt, especially if your garden is really too small to rotate. So clean up your garden, especially those plants that tend to have a lot of disease and insect issues. I'm not saying it's going to completely prevent any issues the following year, but it will definitely keep things from getting worse. And unless you can get your compost pile to about 160 degrees, don't be putting those nightshades and cucurbits in there. All right, so now back to the task at hand. So a couple videos ago, we harvested the rest of our taters out of those 2 tall raised beds. And we've got the plants out of here, but we need to move that worm bin today because pretty soon I'm going to be planting some sweet corn in all 3 of these tall beds. So we installed this little in-bed worm farm when we planted those squash seeds back in early spring. This little setup here is made by Ollie Gardens, same company that makes our raised beds that we have. You can find all their stuff on their website at olliegardens.com and use the code LazyDogFarm to get 10% off. So when we buried this thing, the soil was kind of right at the top here. I think the soil has sank down a little bit, or it looks like this thing has kind of risen up. But the soil sank down. It's not quite as full now because the worms have eaten a lot of the stuff we put in here. There's some fly larvae down in here, but there's also a ton of worms as well. I don't know if y'all can see right there. Look at all those worms just in that little handful. So we got some good worm castings down in there. I got some eggshells that haven't broken down yet. My plan here is to just pull this up. We'll see if I can pull it up or if I have to kind of dig around it a little bit. Pull it up, dump the contents back in the hole, kind of cover that up, and we're going to move this to another bed because where it sits now is going to kind of get in the way of our sweet corn planting. So we're going to pull it up and relocate it. All right, so let's see if we can kind of wiggle this puppy out of here. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. It's in there pretty good. So I'll have to dig around it here. There's worms all around it, right on the outside there. That should be good for the soil going forward. Goodness gracious, they're everywhere around here. Looks like the worms multiplied very well in this bed. I'm guessing having some shade from those squash leaves probably helped out a good bit too. Ah, goodness gracious. Ah, dang, this thing is heavy too, with some dense stuff in there. All right, let's dump all these goodies back in here. You might be wondering, well, why aren't you taking your worms with you? Well, we got plenty more worms over there by the barn. We'll just leave these worms in here since they're already kind of comfortable with this spot. Now, as far as where this thing is going to go next, I really don't have a lot of options out here at the moment because most of the beds are full or going to be planted soon, except for this bed right here where we have a few more leeks to harvest. So let me get those leeks out of there, dress those up a little bit. We'll save those leaves and we'll feed those to the new batch of worms that we put in here in just a minute. All right, so we got the rest of those leeks harvested from that bed and those look pretty good. I might throw some of those on the grill this evening. We got our scraps over there and our dog's bucket because everybody knows worms prefer scraps out of a dog's bucket. Next thing we need to do here is get our irrigation out so we can bury our worm farm. So I'm just going to pull this whole spider setup out of here because the way we've got it ran now won't work with this worm bed in the middle. And I'll just hand water the plants we put in here next. Disconnect it right there, turn that valve off so we won't have any water running out of there. And then we're just going to kind of pull our little spider up out of there and grab these few stakes that we had holding it down. Then we're going to sit our worm farm kind of in the center of the bed here. This will tell us how big a hole we need to dig. Make a little outline here around it. And I think I'm going to have to go get a wheelbarrow because to displace this much dirt here, it's not just going to fit on the outside of this bed. So let me pull out some dirt and then we'll put it back. All right, so we got some nice hole made there. Had to dig down pretty much to where the original soil level is. And what's crazy is all the roots we can see even all the way down here to the bottom of this hole. Those garlic and leek plants had some crazy root systems here, which tells me this is some nice healthy soil, hopefully about to get even healthier. So it looks like a little basket sits in there pretty good. It could stand to be a little bit deeper, but I can't go any deeper because my main line tubing for my irrigation system is right down there. I couldn't dig any deeper, so this will have to work. So now we'll take the dirt that we pulled out and kind of backfill it and then get everything leveled out. All right, so that should work pretty good right there. And as I was filling this back in, I found a few little worms here that were already in this bed, probably from some of our homemade compost that we added when we planted these leeks. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put this leek debris down in the bottom of this thing because I need to use my dog's bucket to go get some worms in a minute, and my worms prefer being transported in a dog's bucket. So we're going to put this stuff down in the bottom here first, and then we'll add some worms and some other stuff. Now over here at our big worm farm, we're going to dig around in here amongst some of these scraps. See if we can find good worms in here. Sometimes they're kind of concentrated in little pockets. And here, there's some good ones right there. There's old green tree frog too. Some worms in there, that'll work. Won't take a whole lot. If we saw anything with that last little run with the in-bed worm farm, they multiplied pretty well inside that little basket. So now we'll dump our worms in here. Well, they sure did love spending some time in that dog's bucket, even though it wasn't long. Get that pressed down a little bit, and then got some coffee grounds and other kitchen scraps right here. Ooh, that's some juicy business right there. Nanner peels, all kind of good stuff there that the worms will like. And we'll put our top on it. Now we just need to plant some stuff around it. So I've got these Ageratum transplants here that have been in this tray way too long, but I've just been keeping them watered, keeping them alive until we found a good spot to put them, and this spot right here is going to be perfect. So Ageratum makes a little fuzzy kind of bluish purple flower. The native bees love this stuff. I like to grow some every year, so I need to kind of thin out these transplants. I'm going to scratch up that root bound ball there, We're just going to try to kind of equally space these around our little worm farm there. Alright, so we found a good use for those Ageratum transplants. We got our worm farm relocated, and we got some leeks out of the deal. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that an in-bed worm farm like that is just going to transform your garden and make your plants grow like nothing else, because I don't believe that to be true. I do think it helps out a little bit. Seemed to help those squash plants a little bit. We showed you on that one video how all those roots were kind of growing towards the middle of the bed there. They were liking something that was going on inside that worm farm. So does it help? Yes, but we don't really have a way to quantify how much it helps. But even if it didn't help at all, it's just really something fun to do, to grow some worms in a garden bed, feed those worms, put less stuff in the garbage can, give it to the worms. And if you've got kids, it's just fun coming out here, feeding those worms, scratching around in there, seeing those worms multiply and grow. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Don't forget to check out our affiliate links in the description below, including Ollie Gardens, where we got that worm farm and all these raised beds here. Also go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com. And if you want to see that video I was talking about, where we showed the squash roots kind of growing towards that worm bed there, check it out right here. You can see how cool that was, seeing how big those squash roots were growing. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.